The screen went black in front of 30,000 live viewers, and with one smug click, the CEO's son deleted everything I'd built for the past 2 years. I'm Mason Ward, senior game designer at Arcadia Interactive, one of the fastest growing indie gaming studios in the country. 2 years ago, I joined the company with nothing but a laptop, a dream, and a willingness to work nights and weekends. By sheer grind, and maybe a bit of luck, I became the lead developer on our most ambitious project yet, Project Eden. It wasn't just a game, it was my game, a live world, building sandbox merging real-time coding, community creativity, and dynamic AI evolution. We'd been teasing it for months, and on that particular Friday night, the world was watching our first live build. Streamers, investors, the CEO himself, everyone tuned in. That's when he walked in, Ethan Rhodes, the CEO's son, 24, fresh out of a marketing degree he barely finished, and already with the job title Creative Director. I didn't give him that title, his last name did. Everyone in the office knew it. We all smiled when he talked, but only because his father owned every paycheck in the building. To me, Ethan was a mosquito buzzing around the edges of my focus, always hovering near my desk, tossing around words like synergy and engagement metrics. While I tried to fix server desync issues, I tolerated him. I even laughed at his jokes in meetings. Because in this industry, if the boss's kid wants to collaborate, you let him. But that night, on the live stream, collaboration turned into destruction. We were 90 minutes in. The build was going flawlessly. Players were watching as I constructed an in-game city in real time, shaping terrain, adjusting AI behaviors, showing off the dynamic ecosystem. It was beautiful. Months of sleepless work breathing before me. The chat was exploding. Investors were already emailing. Then Ethan decided it was his turn to add something. He swaggered into frame, headset crooked, energy drink in hand. "Let's show them how easy it is to make changes," he said, flashing a grin at the camera. I froze. This wasn't rehearsed. He hadn't written a single line of the system code. Before I could stop him, he started clicking through files like a toddler with scissors. I reached for the mouse, muttering something about version control, but he laughed it off. "Relax, Mason, it's just a demo." Then, click, a pause, a confirmation window popped up. "Delete all instance data." He hit yes, the world vanished, the screen went black. My chest did too. Thousands of viewers watched as the chat filled with question marks, and what happened? The feed cut out. The CEO face appeared on my monitor moments later, jaw tight, voice sharp. "We'll talk Monday." Ethan just stood there, pale and trembling now that the adrenaline had faded. "It was an accident," he stammered, but it wasn't. I saw the hesitation in his finger before he clicked. The smirk, the way he looked at me after, like he'd just reminded me who really owned everything I'd made. The next 72 hours were a blur of damage control. We lost contracts. Our pre-orders dropped by nearly a third. The CEO made a public apology video, but never mentioned Ethan's name. Inside the office, though, things got worse. The CEO started restructuring. My role was under review. Ethan was suddenly in charge of PR and community relations, the very department that would determine whether Project Eden lived or died. He started calling me buddy in meetings. "We all make mistakes," he'd say with that corporate smile. He even offered to help rebuild the lost data by coordinating with the design interns. It was humiliating. I stayed late every night, trying to recover files from corrupted backups, my hands shaking with exhaustion. But beneath the fatigue, something colder started forming. An idea. See, I've always believed revenge is best served with precision. It's not about rage. Rage makes you sloppy. Revenge, though, that's an art form. So while Ethan bragged on social media about our strong comeback, I began running quiet scripts at night, data audits, file tracebacks, log analysis, things no one but me could understand, and in those logs, I found something interesting. The deletion wasn't random. The command that wiped the servers didn't come from my workstation. It came from his remote access, authorized under a higher admin key, the kind of key only executives had. He hadn't made a mistake, he'd planned it. Why, I didn't know yet, but I intended to find out. So I smiled through the next week's meetings. I congratulated Ethan on his great communication initiative. I laughed at his jokes. And every night I went home and built something new, not in Arcadia's system, but on my own machine, a shadow build, a mirror of Project Eden, and inside it I hid the first piece of my revenge. The office smelled like stale coffee and fear. I didn't notice it at first. The acrid tang had become a background hum over months, but today it hit me differently. Every corner seemed heavier, every fluorescent bulb buzzing a little sharper. Mason strolled in late, of course, dressed like he owned the place, which, technically, he did. But today there was a new arrogance in his stride, a smugness that made my skin crawl. I couldn't let myself be distracted. My mind was already racing through every possible way he could have deleted the live build. I had checked my access logs again. No breaches, no anomalies, no accidental commands on my end. But Mason, he was. Convenient, too convenient, and then the first red flags started to appear. It began subtly. In the weekly meeting with the board, Mason got extra time to present his ideas. He didn't present anything concrete, just slides full of buzzwords and vague promises, yet the CEO hung on every word. When I tried to interject with real analytics, player retention numbers, bug reports, server stress test outcomes, the CEO waved me off, telling me to let Mason take the lead. I froze, my hands gripping the edge of the table. I had spent months building the numbers Mason was now co-opting like they were his own. And yet, everyone smiled at him, laughed at his jokes. The room buzzed with polite admiration while my chest tightened. After the meeting, I retreated to my desk, trying to breathe normally. But the unease lingered. Then came the whispered phone calls. Mason's office, usually empty and silent, was now alive with the murmur of his voice. I caught fragments as I walked past. Yes, got it. Don't worry about Alex. Everything's covered. I paused, my ear pressed to the door for a moment before stepping back. That everything's covered sounded too deliberate, too secretive. Who was he talking to? Why was he lying about it? I tried to push it out of my mind. Focus. Revenge isn't about paranoia, it's about precision, but my body betrayed me. Every muscle tense, every nerve alert, every thought circling back to the deleted live build. Sleep eluded me. My stomach churned. I barely ate, and even my co-workers, who normally kept me grounded, were starting to avoid eye contact, probably sensing the storm brewing between Mason and me. The favoritism was becoming undeniable. Yesterday, Mason had called in a special meeting with the development team. He didn't even mention me, not once. He praised junior developers for minor fixes I had overseen, and when I asked a question, he waved me off with a grin so sharp it could have drawn blood. It wasn't just him being arrogant. Something deeper was happening. I noticed small discrepancies in the studio's accounts payments labeled as consulting fees, going to anonymous accounts, expense approvals signed off without review, bonus allocations that didn't make sense. Mason's name came up repeatedly, either as approver or recipient. My gut twisted every time I saw it, and yet, here's the cruelest part, I couldn't be sure. I had to keep my rationality intact, even as my emotions frayed. Was Mason intentionally sabotaging me, or was he just reckless and incompetent? Was he hiding something bigger behind the showmanship? Every time I caught him smiling too widely or speaking too smoothly, doubt gnawed at me. At lunch, I overheard a conversation in the break room. Two developers whispered about Mason's late-night personal projects, ones that supposedly could change the studio's future. One of them mentioned hearing about off-the-books meetings with investors and contractors. The words swirled in my mind, off-the-books, investors, contractors. Why had none of this been communicated to me? And why now, of all times, when the live build had just been deleted? I felt a surge of frustration. It wasn't just professional pride being wounded. It was personal. Months of dedication, sleepless nights, constant pressure, and he hadn't just undermined me. He had destabilized everything I had worked for. Every notification ping on my phone felt like a reminder that Mason was free, untouchable, while I was left to clean up his mess. The worst part, the subtle lies. Mason's conversations rarely added up. He claimed to be at investor dinners while I saw his car parked in the garage. He told the CEO that testing was delayed due to my oversight, when I had double-checked every server log. The explanations didn't match the facts, and yet everyone seemed willing to take his word over mine. I realized I was becoming paranoid, but the signals were too clear to ignore. There was a method behind his madness. He wasn't just careless, he wasn't just spoiled, he was strategic, calculating in ways I hadn't anticipated. And if he had a plan, I needed one too. By late afternoon, the weight of the day settled into my shoulders like lead. I retreated to my tiny office cubicle, shutting the door, and stared at my screens. Lines of code blurred into one another. My mind felt fragmented, oscillating between fear, anger, and the strange thrill that comes when you realize you're on the brink of confrontation. Somewhere deep down, a whisper told me Mason wasn't working alone. Maybe he never had been. Maybe someone else in the studio was feeding him, manipulating him, covering his tracks. The idea made my stomach churn, but it also ignited a spark. If he had allies, I would need to find them. If he had blind spots, I would exploit them. And even as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, casting long shadows over the office floor, I noticed something else. Something I hadn't felt before. A flicker of satisfaction. Not at the damage Mason had caused. No, not yet. But at the possibility that his arrogance could be his undoing. I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes for a brief moment, imagining the precise sequence of moves that would bring him down. It wasn't just revenge I craved. It was justice meticulously calculated, elegant in its inevitability. But first, I had to survive the storm, because Mason Hargrove wasn't just a spoiled, entitled brat deleting live builds. He was a variable I didn't fully understand yet, and in the next few weeks, every misstep he made, every secret he tried to hide, would become a piece of the puzzle that I intended to solve. And the worst part? I couldn't tell anyone. Not the CEO, not my team, not even my closest friend at the studio. If word got out that I suspected Mason of sabotage, they'd dismiss me, or worse, they'd cover for him. I was alone. Completely, painfully alone, but that wasn't a weakness. It was an advantage, because when the time came, Mason wouldn't see me coming, and neither would anyone else. The office felt different that morning, though at first I couldn't pinpoint why. The fluorescent lights buzzed a little louder. The hum of servers seemed sharper. And every conversation carried a hidden weight I wasn't used to noticing. Mason strolled in late, as always, his designer sneakers tapping confidently across the polished floor, hair perfectly styled, grin already in place. My stomach clenched at the sight of him. I tried to focus on my monitor, pulling up the backup logs for the live build he had deleted, but my fingers hovered over the keyboard uselessly. Months of work, erased by a name and a smug little signature in the system. Deleted by Mason Hargrove, the words had lost all their meaning except as a taunt. Then the first red flag hit. In the morning meeting with the board, Mason was given priority, an extra 10 minutes to pitch his ideas for a new expansion. He didn't present anything particularly revolutionary, just vague slides with buzzwords like synergy and next-gen immersion. But the CEO hung on every word. When I tried to interject with hard data, analytics, stress test results, retention metrics, I was brushed off. Let Mason finish, the CEO said, his tone impatient but oddly deferential. I clenched my jaw. Months of code, hours of testing, sleepless nights, all overshadowed by a kid who didn't understand even the basics of what we were building. It wasn't just unfair, it was personal. Then came the whispers. I noticed it first as I walked past Mason's office. Hushed conversations, the low murmur of a voice over the phone, the occasional laugh that sounded too rehearsed. Yes, got it. Don't worry about Alex. Everything's handled, he said at one point. My curiosity got the better of me, and I lingered outside the door longer than I should have, pretending to check my emails. Everything's handled. Handled by who? And why was he deliberately lying? I couldn't shake the feeling that he was orchestrating something bigger than his usual incompetence. Favoritism had never been so blatant. Yesterday, Mason had held a casual check-in with junior developers without me. He praised minor fixes I had supervised, handing them off as if they were his own triumphs. When I asked a question during the session, he waved me off with a grin that could have cut glass. Every laugh from the team, every nod of approval toward him, felt like a tiny dagger in my chest. It didn't stop there. As I sifted through the company's financial logs for unrelated work, my eyes caught strange entries, unexplained consulting fees, unaccounted reimbursements, and bonuses that didn't match performance metrics. Mason's name appeared more than once as approver or recipient. A pit formed in my stomach. Something didn't add up. Was he siphoning money? Was this linked to the deletion of the live build? I couldn't tell. The lies were harder to pin down. Mason told the CEO he had been attending investor dinners late into the night. I had seen his car parked in the garage on multiple occasions, lights off, doors locked. In meetings, he claimed delays were due to my oversight, completely fabricated, and the worst part, everyone seemed willing to take his word. The CEO, my teammates, even the junior developers I trained. They were all buying into it. By lunch, the strain was starting to manifest physically. My head ached, my hands trembled when I typed, and the leftover tension in my chest refused to ease. I tried eating a sandwich at my desk, but my stomach churned. Sleep had become a memory, caffeine was my only ally, yet it barely dulled the edge of anger and frustration gnawing at me. I wasn't paranoid, at least I didn't think I was, but the signals were everywhere. Mason had access, influence, and the ability to manipulate perception. The deleted build might have been his first overt act, but the pattern was emerging. Favoritism, secret calls, financial discrepancies, lies, all pointing to one thing, something bigger than a simple mistake. The whispers I overheard in the break room didn't help. Two junior developers were talking in hushed tones about Mason's personal projects. Off the books endeavors that supposedly could revolutionize the studio. One mentioned hearing about late night meetings with investors and contractors, the kind of connections that never made it to my desk. Why hadn't I been informed? The thought spiraled. Why now? I felt a twisted mix of rage and helplessness. Months of dedication, sleepless nights, and blood, sweat, and code, deleted in an instant. And yet Mason strolled through the office as if nothing had happened, shields up, smirk intact. By mid-afternoon, the weight of suspicion settled into a physical ache. I retreated to my cubicle, shutting the door, closing myself off from the rest of the studio. My monitors glowed with lines of code, yet they offered no solace. My mind oscillated between fear, anger, and a strangely thrilling realization. Mason might have underestimated me. Somewhere deep down, I began to suspect he wasn't working alone. Maybe someone else had fed him information, guided him, covered his tracks. The thought made my stomach turn, but it also sparked a flicker of determination. If he had allies, I would find them. If he had blind spots, I would exploit them. Even as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, casting long shadows across the office floor, I noticed something unsettling, something I hadn't felt before. A flicker of satisfaction, not for what had been destroyed, but for the knowledge that his arrogance could be his undoing. I leaned back, closing my eyes for a moment, replaying every small misstep Mason had made in the last week. Every lie, every manipulation, every moment of overconfidence. Each one was a potential opening, a weakness I could exploit when the time came. But I had to be patient. Precision was key. This wasn't about a tantrum or a confrontation. It was about calculation. About using the tools I had, my knowledge of the code, and my understanding of the office's dynamics to orchestrate something Mason wouldn't see coming. And the cruelest part, I couldn't trust anyone. If anyone in the studio suspected my intentions, or even my doubts, they might side with him, or worse, he'd know I was alone, isolated, but that wasn't weakness, that was advantage, because when the time came, Mason Hargrove wouldn't see me coming. Neither would anyone else, and even now, as I stared at my backup drives, a subtle unease remained. The deletion of the live build wasn't just a slap in the face. It was the opening move, and I knew deep down that whatever came next would be far more dangerous than I had imagined. But I was ready. The moment I realized I couldn't stay silent was subtle at first. It wasn't a dramatic explosion, not a shout across the office or a confrontation in the boardroom. It was a quiet, almost imperceptible signal, the empty chairs around me, the blank faces avoiding my gaze, the subtle nods of approval for Mason's every word. I'd been hurting for days, trapped in this fog of disbelief, betrayal, and frustration. I replayed the deletion over and over, imagining the months of work disappearing in a single click, the countless nights spent debugging servers, tweaking code, and patching errors. Gone. My pride had been stripped away, my professional integrity undermined, and for what? Because Mason, the CEO's son, could, and because everyone else was too scared or too polite to call it what it was, sabotage. I sat at my desk, staring at my monitors, numb. But that numbness shifted as I scrolled through the logs, checking the backups I had encrypted. Every line of code, every version, every tweak I had made, it was all still there. I hadn't lost everything, not really. And then I caught sight of Mason in the corner of my eye. He was laughing with one of the junior developers, pointing at something on the screen, unaware that I had been watching. Something about the casual confidence in his posture, the unearned smugness on his face, ignited something in me. Not rage exactly, not yet, but clarity. It hit me like a jolt of electricity. This wasn't just hurt anymore. This wasn't just frustration. This was war. The realization came in stages. First, anger. How dare he? How dare he delete my work? How dare he act untouchable when he has no right to? Then disbelief, and everyone just lets it happen. No one stops him. No one questions him. Not even the CEO, and finally, determination. If I don't fight back, no one else will. If I don't act, Mason wins by default. I leaned back in my chair and let it sink in. Months of planning, careful coding, and meticulous attention to detail had given me a weapon, knowledge. Mason had recklessly deleted the live build, thinking he could intimidate me, thinking I'd crumble, thinking that the heir of the company could never fail. He was wrong. The trigger moment came just as I opened the backup files, the code glowing faintly on my dual monitors. A notification popped up from the internal messaging system. "Hey Alex, Mason's asking everyone to push his new build. Make sure it's done by EOD. Don't fail him." It was the casual arrogance in the wording that snapped me. He wasn't just careless, he was cruel. He wasn't just entitled. He was actively sabotaging the people around him to prove a point, and he was smiling while doing it. I slammed my hands on the desk, my heart raced. This was no longer about recovering work. This was about reclaiming my dignity, my reputation, and my right to exist in the studio without being manipulated. This was about proving to Mason and everyone else that I was not a pawn in his game. I realized I had underestimated the depth of his entitlement. He didn't just want control, he wanted dominance. He wanted me to feel powerless. And for a brief, searing moment, I let myself feel all the pain he had inflicted. The sleepless nights, the humiliation in meetings, the subtle erasure of my contributions. And then I pushed it down, transforming it into something sharper, focus. I stood up and paced the office. I needed a plan, a sequence of moves that would be deliberate, controlled, and devastatingly effective. Hitting him out of anger would get me nowhere. I had to think like him, but better. Every lie he told, every favor he received, every short cut he took was a vulnerability waiting to be exploited. That evening, I stayed late, alone, running simulations in my mind. How would Mason react if he thought he had full control over the next deployment? What if I let him believe he was orchestrating another triumph, only to reveal the truth at the perfect moment? What if every act of arrogance became a trap? As I reviewed the logs again, a new emotion crept in, satisfaction. Not of revenge yet, but of possibility. I realized I had been grieving the deletion of the build, mourning months of work, when in reality nothing was truly lost. Mason had underestimated me, and in underestimating me, he had given me an edge. I allowed myself a small, sharp smile. I could do this, I would do this, and it wouldn't be messy or emotional. It would be precise, calculated, and undeniable. By the time I left the office that night, my shoulders were straighter, my chest heavier with resolve rather than despair. The quiet tension that had been coiling inside me had shifted, transformed into something potent, a plan forming, a strategy crystallizing. Mason didn't know it yet, but the first move had already been made. And when the day came to strike, I would be ready, not just to restore what was taken from me, but to make sure he remembered, in the smallest and most meticulous ways, that no one messes with the work I've built. For the first time since the live build was deleted, I slept with purpose. The anger was still there, smoldering like embers, but it had been harnessed. The betrayal had cut deep, yes, but it had also sparked a fire I couldn't ignore. And that fire would guide every move, every calculation, every small step toward what I now knew was inevitable. My revenge. I didn't tell anyone, not a single soul. Revenge, I knew, was like a virus. The moment you brag about it, it loses its potency. Mason, on the other hand, was still striding through the office like he owned the place, which, in a way, he thought he did. That was his mistake. Step 1 was observation. I spent the next few days following his patterns meticulously. Where he went, who he spoke to, and what he left behind. Mason made mistakes without even realizing it. He had a habit of leaving browser tabs open, conversations half, recorded in messaging apps, and occasionally unsecured files on shared drives. I cataloged every slip, every inconsistency, every whisper of deception, storing it all offline, away from prying eyes. The irony was that I had access to everything he did because I was, after all, the one who knew the system best. His arrogance blinded him to the fact that I could trace every move he made. Every call he pretended was business only. Every favor he secretly granted himself, every false report he submitted. They were breadcrumbs. And I intended to follow them to the bitter end. Step 2 was verification. I couldn't just collect proof. I needed irrefutable evidence. So I began cross-checking every claim he made in meetings against system logs, emails, and financial reports. Every number he fudged, every project he oversaw, without merit, every excuse he made for failures. Every lie was documented, time-stamped, and cataloged. By the end of the week, I had a folder on my encrypted drive labeled simply, Mason Hargrove Liability. Inside were screenshots of falsified reports, financial anomalies, misleading emails, and chat logs where he took credit for my work. It was meticulous, boring work, but every entry was a piece of ammunition. Step 3 required subtle manipulation. Mason needed to feel untouchable, to continue flaunting his control. I couldn't confront him head-on yet. He thrived on confidence, so I started feeding his ego. Every small victory he claimed, I let slide. Every misstep he made, I recorded silently, but allowed him to believe it went unnoticed. During a strategy meeting, he presented a proposal for a next-gen build that was basically a rushed version of the code I had rebuilt after the deletion. He expected applause. Instead, I nodded politely, making small notes, asking seemingly innocent questions that would later serve as hooks. He left the room beaming, certain he had everyone convinced of his genius. Meanwhile, I subtly planted doubts among the junior developers. Nothing overt, nothing that would raise alarms, just questions. Hey, did you double check this build? Or I thought the backup logs looked different. Are we missing something? They trusted me. They listened. By the time Mason realized anyone was scrutinizing him, the net would already be closing. Step 4 was the trap itself. I created a dummy build, perfectly functional, but containing subtle flags only I could detect. Mason, eager to impress and completely unaware, was instructed by the CEO to oversee its deployment. I watched from the shadows as he patted himself on the back, ensuring he was visibly in control, sending status updates that everyone could see. The board thought he was leading. In reality, he was walking straight into my carefully orchestrated snare. Even so, the tension gnawed at me. Every day I watched him strut through the office, cracking jokes, taking credit, and exuding control. I felt a strange mix of anxiety and thrill. He was oblivious, but one wrong glance, one accidental suspicion, could ruin months of preparation. Every small interaction became a chess move: who to talk to, what to leave behind, how to ensure he stayed confident, yet ignorant. And then there were the financial discrepancies. I quietly notified the accounting department to keep logs of all Mason's approvals without tipping them off to Y. Every expense he approved personally, consultants, contractors, small marketing bonuses, was tagged and traced. When the time came, this evidence would form the backbone of the case that would make him look reckless, manipulative, and entirely unfit to manage anything. Step 5, perhaps the most delicate, involved the CEO. I couldn't expose Mason directly yet, because he still had the influence of being the heir. So I planted subtle hints, small anomalies in reports that even the CEO would notice if he looked carefully. The idea wasn't to accuse yet, it was to seed doubt, to make the board, the CEO, and Mason himself question whether everything was as it seemed. Every interaction, every carefully chosen action, served two purposes: feed Mason's arrogance and prepare for his downfall. I watched him check in with investors, walk past the server room without a second glance, and declare that all deadlines were under control. I nodded along silently, letting him believe he had won, all while knowing that the web I had woven was closing tighter with each passing day. By the end of the week, the tension in the office had shifted subtly. Mason still felt in control, confident, untouchable, but I noticed cracks forming elsewhere. Junior developers were hesitating to make decisions without consulting me. Small questions about builds, budgets, and approvals began circulating, instilling the tiniest doubt in his followers. It was invisible, almost imperceptible, but the seed was planted. And for me, every moment spent watching him act so recklessly, every smug grin he flashed in the office, fueled something darker. I wasn't just restoring what he had taken from me. I was creating a situation where every bit of his arrogance, every careless lie, and every underhanded move would come back to him. I sat at my desk late that Friday, monitors glowing, fingers poised above the keyboard. I ran a final check of the dummy build, the financial irregularities, and the logs of his personal communications. Everything aligned perfectly. Every piece of evidence was in place, every subtle trap laid. I leaned back and allowed myself a small, controlled smile. Mason had no idea. He was still the cocky, untouchable CEO's son. He didn't suspect a thing, and that was exactly how I wanted it. The calm before the storm was intoxicating. The tension in the office was almost palpable. I could feel it as I walked past Mason's desk, his laughter ringing through the hallways, his hands drumming against the polished wood like a king surveying his kingdom. He believed he had won, but the foundation of that victory was built on lies, arrogance, and ignorance, and I was ready to tear it apart, piece by piece, because by the time the board, the investors, and the team saw the full picture, it would be too late for Mason. And I would be the one standing quietly in the shadows, teehee architect of a perfect, calculated revenge. The office was unusually quiet that Monday morning. Even the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed subdued, as if the building itself knew something monumental was about to happen. I walked in carrying nothing but my laptop, the culmination of weeks of careful observation, painstaking documentation, and meticulous planning. The air was electric with anticipation, though no one, least of all Mason, had any idea. He was in the conference room, standing at the head of the table with that trademark smirk, projecting confidence that everyone in the room, including the CEO, seemed to feed on. "This next build is going to set us apart," he said, voice dripping with self-assured superiority. "Alex worked hard on it, but don't worry, I've optimized it." He chuckled at his own joke, a sound that had grated on me for months. Today, it would be the last time. I took my seat quietly, eyes flicking over the team, over Mason, over the CEO. Everyone was tense, but no one realized why. They were waiting for Mason to lead, to inspire, to impress. He thrived on that attention, and he would get it, all at once. Step 1 of the reveal was subtle. As Mason began outlining the deployment, I connected my laptop to the central projector. The dummy build, the one he thought he had overseen perfect, lashed onto the screen. For a second, he didn't notice. I calmly navigated through the code, pointing out anomalies in a neutral matter of fact tone. "Interesting," I said softly. "It seems some functions aren't optimized correctly. I ran a comparison with the last stable version, and there are discrepancies that could affect the client's end-of-year report." A murmur ran through the room. Mason's smirk faltered for the first time. "What discrepancies?" he asked, voice just a touch sharper than usual. I clicked through the logs, highlighting the issues one by one. Every inconsistency, every failure to credit proper sources, every alteration he had made without authorization was now visible to everyone. The CEO brow furrowed. Mason's face went pale. Step 2 was the public exposure. I opened a series of files I had been saving for exactly this moment. Internal communications showing him taking credit for my work. Emails to investors laced with misleading claims. Budget approvals that were reckless at best. I didn't comment. I let the evidence speak for itself. Screenshots, logs, even video snippets of him deleting prior builds. All there, undeniable, indisputable. Mason's panic became visible, subtle at first. A twitch in his jaw, a hand gripping the edge of the table. His words began to falter, each one contradicted by the cold, hard facts displayed on the screen. This is just, you're twisting things." I cut him off gently but firmly. "I'm not twisting anything. This is the live build you deleted, the one you claimed credit for rebuilding. These are the logs of your changes. Every report, every email, every call. They're all here. And now, everyone can see the truth." The CEO leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. "Mason, can you explain this?" Mason swallowed hard. He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. It's not what it looks like. "Alex, I didn't touch your files," I interrupted. "I preserved everything, but you deleted the live build, took credit for the restoration, and misled the team. These anomalies are not mistakes. They're choices, and today everyone sees them." There was a long silence, heavy and suffocating. You could hear the subtle shift in the room. Trust dissolving. Alliances crumbling. Junior developers exchanged nervous glances. The board members leaned forward, scanning the evidence I had compiled. Mason's control was slipping like sand through his fingers. Then came the final strike. I opened the financial reports I had quietly compiled over the last month, showing all of Mason's unauthorized approvals and reckless spending. Every irregular expense, every bonus misallocated, every diversion of funds, all laid bare. The numbers were staggering, and the CEO face hardened as he scrolled. "Mason," the CEO said, voice low and dangerous. "Do you have an explanation for this?" The smirk was gone. Mason stammered. It's just a misunderstanding. I didn't." "You didn't what?" I asked, voice calm, slicing through the tension like a knife. "Delete the live build, mislead the investors, take credit for work that wasn't yours. Every single one of your actions has been documented, and every single one is here for the board to review." By now, the atmosphere was electric, charged with humiliation, disbelief, and revelation. Mason's empire of arrogance was collapsing in real time, and he knew it. He looked around the room, searching for allies, but everyone's eyes were on me, or on the undeniable evidence displayed on the screen. I didn't think anyone would notice," Mason finally whispered, a faint tremor in his voice. I was just what?" I asked softly. "Just deleting someone's work for your amusement. Just relying on your title to shield yourself from consequences." He had no answer. The CEO shook his head slowly, disappointed. "Mason, you've crossed every line. not only professionally, but personally. I trusted you to act responsibly. This is unacceptable." And just like that, Mason's world crumbled. The board called an emergency meeting to discuss his conduct. Investors were alerted. Internal communications were sent. The humiliation was immediate and public. My revenge was not loud or vengeful. It was methodical, undeniable, and exact. I watched silently as Mason's confident demeanor shattered. The once untouchable heir, the spoiled son of the CEO, was reduced to whispers, stammering excuses, and desperate attempts to salvage what little pride he had left. His misdeeds were now permanent records, documented for the entire company and board to review. For me, there was no gloating, only a sense of calm satisfaction. I had been wronged and I had acted. I had protected my work, exposed the deceit, and reminded everyone who truly deserved credit. Mason had deleted the live build, but I had rebuilt far more than code. I had rebuilt my own sense of power, control, and justice. As the board deliberated and Mason was escorted from the room, head hung low, I packed my laptop and left the conference room. The tension lingered, but the weight of victory settled over me. The hero, they would call me later, but in that moment I simply felt restored. The office doors closed behind me, the echoes of his downfall fading into the halls. And somewhere in the quiet I smiled. My revenge had been calculated, precise, unavoidable, perfect. Mason had underestimated me, and that, more than anything, had been his fatal mistake. The office had changed. It wasn't just quieter, it was lighter. The tension that had hung like a storm cloud over the team for months had lifted. Mason was gone, his reputation in ruins, and with him went the arrogance and recklessness that had threatened not just my work but the entire company. People now approached me with respect, not just for my technical skills, but for the courage and clarity I had shown. I didn't celebrate, not outwardly. I had never wanted vengeance for applause or recognition. It was enough to know that truth had outlasted lies, that my work and integrity had endured where Mason's deceit had collapsed spectacularly. Still, there was a quiet satisfaction that lingered each time I walked past his old office, empty and sterile, a stark reminder of what happens when entitlement meets negligence. The CEO finally pulled me into his office after the dust had settled. "You did what needed to be done," he said, voice uncharacteristically somber. "You protected the company, the team, and yourself. That takes courage." I nodded, trying not to let the relief show too much. It had been exhausting, the planning, the waiting, the careful orchestration of each step. But it had worked, flawlessly. I returned to my desk, the hum of my computer and the soft clicking of keyboards around me now comforting rather than suffocating. I opened a fresh build of the project Mason had deleted months ago and ran it flawlessly. The code was stable, optimized, and ready for deployment. This wasn't just a victory over him. It was proof that I could rebuild stronger, wiser, and unshaken by betrayal. But the satisfaction wasn't just professional. On a personal level, I felt lighter, freer. Mason had tried to undermine me, to erase my work, to make me doubt my own value. And yet, in trying to destroy me, he had only proven how resolute I could be. I had taken the chaos he created and transformed it into a fortress of clarity and control. Sometimes, late at night, I think about Mason. About how one person's arrogance and short-sightedness can ripple across an entire company, and how one carefully calculated response can bring it all crashing down. It's poetic justice, in the most satisfying sense. He deleted the live build, thinking he could erase my efforts, my credibility, and my voice. And yet here I am, the project thriving, my reputation intact, and his hubris exposed for the world to see. And isn't that just how betrayal works sometimes? The person who thinks they have the upper hand often becomes their own downfall. For those of you watching this, think about your own experiences. Have you ever faced betrayal? Someone undermining you, stealing credit, or manipulating your trust? How did it feel to watch someone try to rewrite your story? I want to hear your experiences. Drop a comment below and share your story. Let's talk about the lessons we've learned and the ways we've stood back up, stronger than before. If you've ever been in my shoes or even just love stories of clever revenge and poetic justice, hit that subscribe button. There's more where this came from. Stories that prove patience, strategy, and intellect always outlast arrogance and deception. As for Mason, well, let's just say that some lessons are learned the hard way. And in his case, the lesson was clear. You can delete the live build, but you can't delete the consequences of your actions. Because in the end, the one who calculates their revenge doesn't just survive betrayal, they make it unforgettable.